everybody, I'm Dr. Nikki. I am the founder of the Female Health Doctor Clinic, which is a private clinic in Milton Keynes and also runs online as well for those of you who are not close to Milton Keynes. And every week I'm bringing you a different gynecological problem to talk through, or a menopause problem, or just generally how people are feeling at the moment. So this one is a kind of a feely one, and I really hope you enjoy it because I've been joined by Jodie Brooks, who you might see here, and she is amazing. And she's going to tell you all about herself. Honestly, I think what she's doing is amazing and really, really useful. And you never know, there might be someone in your life that could use the services that she offers. But yeah, we wanted to talk about kind of how women in their 30s, 40s, 50s can start to feel really pressured. This is a really high pressure time of life, isn't it? So, Jodie, why don't you tell everybody who you are and what you do, and then we'll get into it.
Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, good morning. My name's Jodie, and I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for 24 years now, which makes me feel very old. And majority of my early career was sort of spent managing nursing homes, a lot of managerial things. And I moved away from that about 12 years ago and became an expert witness to the courts. So I would help solicitors by providing a care report, mainly in cases where there was a life-limiting illness, so asbestos cancers, delayed diagnosis reports, things like that. So I've spent the last 12 years doing that alongside nursing, palliative care nursing in the community. And one thing I kept seeing as an expert witness was these families knew that their relative had a life-limiting condition and knew that at some point they were going to require care. But when it actually tipped over into that part of the last stages where the person requires care, there was this sort of panic and crisis a lot of the time. Families sort of expecting that the statutory services would come out of the woodwork and provide all the care that was needed. And unfortunately, due to stretched services, funding problems in the NHS, that just doesn't happen a lot of the time. So if you're in a well-resourced area and you've got a fantastic hospice locally and they provide care in your own home, you might have a great experience. But equally, I've seen many incidences where it's a bit of a postcode lottery. And if you're in an area that doesn't have a hospice, that's got a hospice at home system where they can come out and provide care in your own home, you're more likely reliant on the district nursing team, who would come in and perhaps maybe set up a syringe drive or do your symptom management and things like that towards the end of life. And district nursing teams in particular are under massive pressure. That's not that's pretty standard across the UK now. So there was this big shortfall, and I often saw families in this state of, well, who's going to help us? Families being awake night after night, trying to care for their loved ones, things like that. And I suppose that all sort of came to a head last year when my own mum got poorly with cancer, and we were caring for her at home. She wanted to stay at home. She didn't want to be in hospital again. She'd been messed around so much. So it was really important that we kept her at home. And we're lucky where I live. We've got a great hospice at home service, but it's a charity and they're not able to do everything you need. So me and my dad were providing some overnight care towards the end of her life. And it made me realize that when you're actually in the middle of those stressful situations, this is very different. You can be a nurse and you can be the best palliative care nurse in the world. But when it comes to your family, it was almost like someone took my little nursing hat and threw it away. The stress and distress of the situation made me realize it's quite difficult to think clearly and objectively about what you need in that moment, where you can find it, how you're going to get it. And you're already exhausted. So that was the seed of the idea, really, of setting up Brooks Care Solutions. And the end of life, helping people find end of life care is only one aspect of what I do. I help people find care for, residential care if they want to move out of their house, or care to stay in their own home. There's those three main areas, really. But that's really what spurred me to set it up last year.
Yeah, and it's so important. It's so important. I had the same thing with my dad towards the end of his life, and I know you can get care more quickly when somebody is palliative, but it doesn't take away from how hard it is on the day-to-day. You know, as you said, there's so much stress going on, there's so many things on your mind. You know, you're trying to figure out how you're going to pay bills, how you're going to look after perhaps young children in some situations as well, isn't it? Especially if we're talking sort of people in their 30s, 40s, even 50s now. You know, people are having kids later, so you're trying to do that, and you're trying to work out how are you going to do this, you know, pay for bills, sort the cooking out, sort everything else out, and then you've got a sick relative on top of it. So the fact that you've lived through that yourself and you've got that experience means that you can apply that to your business, and you've got that. It's like another layer of empathy, isn't it? We've all got empathy for people, but it sort of brings it to another level when you've experienced it yourself, right?
Yeah, it really does. And I think that's part of the problem here, is that it's not just about taking on that caring role. And a caring role can be anything from a few hours to 30 hours a week. When we talk about carers, unpaid carers, if you like, it doesn't necessarily mean you've given up your job. Often it's added on to an already full plate. And that's particularly for women. And that, you know, the research does show there's a strong gender bias here, that the majority of the women that are providing that informal unpaid care are working and tend to provide more intense care. And the problem with that being is it does have a direct impact on your health if you're not very careful. And the research shows that you're 10% more likely to develop a long-term condition or a disability if you've got a caring role. And you know, the likelihood of that goes up in line with the amount of care you're providing and the intensity of care you're providing. And having been in that situation and worked alongside many people that have been in that situation, you can quite clearly see that. You can, you know, if I'm stressed, I get eczema. And it comes out in the same place. It's sort of like everyone's got a little Achilles heel. For some people, it's pain in the neck or their back goes. You know, body stress will out in your body one way or the other. And, you know, when mum was poorly, my hands were just covered. It's quite clear, you know, it's having a physical effect of the stress of caring, and not just caring, but knowing that a parent is becoming frail or unwell. It's really stressful. And I'd, you know, just want to be able to help people with that if I can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think if you're adding in sort of hormonal imbalances into that as well, I mean, that's something that I see a lot. I see a lot of women who are in their perimenopause. Some of them are now postmenopausal. And the stress doesn't go just because your hormones have changed. The stress is still there, but if anything, it just makes life that little bit more difficult to navigate, doesn't it? You know, when you're not feeling at your best and your hormones are making you feel incredibly emotional regardless anyway, and then you add on all this, it's just it's a kind of recipe for disaster, really, isn't it? And no wonder so many women are leaving their workplaces. They are, you know, scaling back on their hours. That, you know, it's having a detrimental effect not just on our health, as you've said, but also on our finances and our pensions, and we're the ones that need more of a pension, not less of a pension, you know.
Exactly. And that's why I think this issue needs to be talked about more. It is happening slowly. We had the Carers Leave Act came into effect this year. For employed people, you can have apply to have a week of unpaid leave if you're caring for somebody. It's progress, but it's, you know, policy is slow to respond, and it doesn't go far enough to address the issues that sort of, you know, I don't want to lump people, carer can be any age, but perimenopausal women, so this area, women 35 to 55, you know, this time of life, I don't think in the history of man there's ever been quite this concoction of pressures put upon women at this time of life. It's quite tricky, and a lot of women are either reducing their hours or leaving the workplace altogether. And as you know, Nikki, the risk of depression goes up in perimenopause. The risk of depression also goes up if you're caring for somebody. So add those two together, and it's a bit of a perfect storm, really. It can lead you into this sort of catch-22. You know, you're stressed with your job and life, so you can become snappy with your family, and that leads you into feeling really even worse about yourself. So it becomes a bit of a negative spiral. It
Yeah.
can, I'm not saying this is for everybody, but I see it happening a lot. You know, I've got friends my age who are going through this same thing. I'm going through it. You know, I know that I'm not like the life and soul of the party a lot of the time because of
Mm.
these things that are going on. So being able to have that dialogue about it is really important and useful. And if us having a conversation like this and other people having conversations around this
Mm.
enables other women in this situation to say, yeah, do you know what? It's really hard at the moment. Then it's got to
Mm.
be a good thing.
Yeah, and it's also reaching out for help, isn't it? Which I know I can be terrible at. But when you're struggling, you do need to ask for help, and it may be that you reach out to someone like you to say, "Look, I just can't. I need help now with this." And I think guilt can hold people back a lot, can't it? Because they think, "Oh, I have to be able to do everything myself. I have to be able to look after my parent at home, or I have to be able to do all the things." But actually, that's not true, is it? It's a societal pressure, or it's some weird pressure that we've picked up from since we were a child or something. But
Yeah.
actually, sometimes you don't want to be a carer for your loved ones. You want to just be daughter or wife or mother.
Yeah. And
You
sometimes
don't
they
want
don't
to.
want you to be a carer. This is the thing that people
Exactly.
overlook. You know, I have people come to me with this, you know, these feelings of guilt. And I ask them, you know, well, do you think your mum or dad would want you to be helping them with a shower? Well, no. Okay.
No.
So, you know, it's just often having that conversation. And I
Mhm.
think the other issue is that people don't want to talk about care until it's too late sometimes,
Mm.
until they actually already need the care. And don't get me wrong, I'm very happy to help people in that situation, and people do come to me in that situation quite a lot, but it's so
Yeah.
much less stressful for the family and the person needing the care if you can just think a little bit in advance and just let's do it at a pace where they're not, you know, on their own 1 minute, then the next minute there's a crisis, and which can often lead to an unwanted
Mm.
admission to a hospital, or in the case of a life-limiting illness, to a hospice. They might not want to be there, and that could have
Yeah.
possibly been avoided if we'd have just looked at bits of support, like a graduated bit of support. If they're not ready for someone to help them with their personal care, maybe it's a bit of cleaning to begin with. So they're
Mm.
getting used to having somebody coming in to help them. And then that transition then to having somebody pop in the morning to help with medications or a wash and things like that, it doesn't feel as big.
No, that's true. That's a really good tip. So it's thinking about it in advance, gradually introducing that kind of support. But I guess it's if you're that woman who's trying to help their parent with these sorts of things, it's also about trying to convince them that this is what they should do. Because I often see that as well. I see a lot of people that are kind of at loggerheads. They're like, I need help, you need help, but they don't want the help. So then you're stuck in this, well, I still need help, but you're not letting me get the help. And everyone's just stressed.
Yeah, and it can be tricky because
Mm.
obviously you need to keep somebody as independent as possible and keep
Yeah.
them at the middle of the decision making, the person that needs the care. You know, this is not about coming in and saying, right, we're going to take over from this point. Everything we do starts with the person themselves. And yes, sometimes there is a resistance to that. But
Mm.
you know, after 24 years of nursing, I'm fairly good at speaking to people and just exploring with them in a non-threatening way what would make their life easier, what would give them greater quality of life. And if you frame it from that aspect, rather than you need help, you can't cope, and we're going to come in and do it for you, then
Yeah.
you will have much more, you know, success and a smoother transition to accepting care. It's about how you approach it a lot of the time. You can find that when people are getting older and their disability gradually increases, their life can get smaller. And because it's
Mhm.
happening gradually, they don't always realize it until you sit
Yeah.
down and perhaps have a conversation about interests and hobbies, for example. What is it that you enjoy doing? Well, actually, I enjoy going to a garden centre, but I've not been able to do that because my daughter and son work and I can't drive anymore, or I don't feel safe to drive. And if you can approach it from that side and go, well, how would you feel if we could just get somebody to come in once a week and take you to the garden centre? You know,
Mm.
choose the plants for your raised beds outside and have a coffee and some lunch while you're there. And then you start to see the value in actually having some assistance, and it doesn't become this negative, you know, I'm not independent anymore. It's actually about
Yeah.
promoting independence, which is far
Yeah.
more valuable to that person.
Well, we would accept help from a guide dog, wouldn't we? We'd accept help, you know, in that sort of situation. I know it's a completely different thing, but it's still about independence. That's the core of it, isn't it? It's about what would you do to get your independence back? Well, you'd accept the help of a guide dog, presumably, so
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can go out and you can do things. So why not help? You know, get accept you know, a helper to come with you to take you to the garden centre. Like
Yeah.
that's giving you their independence back. I think that's a really great idea and a great thought that not a lot of people will necessarily realise that's out there and available. So yeah, that's really good.
Exactly. You know, and I think there is a fear around getting care because we know it's an expensive thing to do. I primarily work with people that are self-funding, which means that you've got over £23,250 in available assets, like savings. And people know care is really expensive. There's no getting away from that. It is, if you're paying for your own care. So there is a reluctance to begin to engage with it because they know it's expensive. But what I can do is research care providers, get their availability, get their fees, and and I can be the buffer there. You're not having to make that call to them and put your name on their database so that they've got your details. I can do that for you and be the mediator. And then we can look at that in an unpressured way. You know, nobody's going to be phoning you saying, "Oh, have you come to a decision about whether you want to employ us as carers?" You know, and I can help you vet the care providers. I go through all the CQC reports. I even try and look at Glassdoor and things like that, which is,
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah, employees putting their perspective of the employer on there. So take a real 360-degree audit of the care providers. So by the time you actually employ that person, the hard work is done, really. You know.
Yeah, which is also really good because it can feel really overwhelming, can't it? Especially if you are busy, you've got loads of stuff on your plate, and you haven't got the capacity to do all of that research. But equally, if you are an older person, it can feel quite frightening, can't it? Because we see so many stories now, people being scammed, and it breaks my heart when you hear of people's life savings being stolen and things. So you don't want unnecessary phone calls and pressure, and it just, I
No.
mean, it's just horrible, isn't it, when you have to do that sort of
Yes,
stuff. So
it is. And I think that's primarily why I've chosen to, you know, when you set up a business, you have to sort of decide who you're aiming your service at. And even though the older person is at the center of everything that we do, it becomes more difficult for people to talk on the phone. Not everybody is on the internet. They don't always want to be bothered with dealing with correspondence and things like that. So I have to aim my services at the people that are likely to be procuring the care. And that is often the children, who are
yeah,
often my age, around my age and upwards, who are already busy. You've got career, children, even if they're teenagers and older, it doesn't mean you're not worrying about them anymore, that they don't
yeah,
necessarily need you. Running the household, you know, there still is this traditional gender expectation that women take the majority of the caring role. I'm not by any means saying that that's the case in every family. It's not, but it's still there. You know, it is still there with children and with parents. I actually
yeah,
read some interesting research yesterday that said that women are more likely to deliver more high intensity care to parents, and it's more likely to interfere with their work. Whereas men, when they do deliver care, it's more likely to be less intensive tasks, and it's more likely to fit around their existing work and responsibilities. And I thought that was really interesting.
yeah. I think I'm finding it with the expectations of being a mother as well. I mean, I'm going through the adoption process, and I know we're talking a completely different process, but already the discussion is around, well, how much time are you taking off work? Uh, why does it just have to be me? Like, why can't we
Really?
do 6 months and 6 months? Oh, they don't like it if you do that. You have to be, whoever it is has got to be the consistent one for the whole 6 months to a year.
Yeah.
And only until very recently, we've been doing this now since August, but only until in the last, I'd say, month, has anybody asked my husband, how are you going to fit this in?
Wow. Still
No one else.
happening.
Still happening. I'm fine, I understand it. I'm going into this to be a mother, and I'm gonna do my damn hardest to make sure that I am the best one I could possibly be. But yeah, even that, you think, why am I being expected to do all this stuff? So it's going to be a very similar thing, isn't it? That is, there's still that kind of underlying expectation that the daughter is going to be the one that does things. If you've got a son and a daughter, it's true. In my family, it's exactly the same thing. The sons are nowhere to be found in a crisis. I mean, for me and my sister, there's only the two of us, so obviously we'll both be able to help with my mum. But she lives down towards my mum, so if anything happens, she's going to be the first one that has it, and she's got 2 young children, and she works, so she's going to be the first one that gets the brunt of everything.
Yeah.
And then I'll have to catch up afterwards. So sometimes it's down to location as well, isn't it? But yeah, there's still a lot of that going on.
It is, and it's a tricky one because it's hard to discuss the reality of the situation without making the older generation feel like a burden, because you want to provide, you want to help, of course you do. In most cases, people love their parents very dearly, they want to provide the help. But it's the shift in perspective on the pressures on those people that needs to be addressed. It is starting to happen. The government are realizing that without informal unpaid carers, this country is going to be in trouble, with the amount of older people that are living longer. So they are starting to change policies, as we're seeing, to support those people, but it's nowhere near enough. You're seeing in the tabloids now, people that are claiming, quite rightly, carers benefit, and then being, going over thresholds and being dragged through the courts and things like that. There's a lot that's still got to change. And that's why I was really happy to have this conversation with you today, because I think there's a lot of women out there in similar situations to how I was last year, and you almost feel guilty talking about it because it's expected that you care for your family, and we get that, but you can only have so much on your plate without breaking. And it's important that the workplace, that society in general, that healthcare professionals recognize the particular pressures that can be on women going through hormonal changes at this time of life, with the added stress, whatever you want to call it, of caring for family members. And it gives me great satisfaction to be able to help people in that situation.
Yeah, and I would say, if anyone is feeling guilty about it, think of this as a kind of act of self-love, act of self-care, as well as an act of love for whoever it is that you're seeking the care for, because we're all too busy, we're all doing too much. And I say that as somebody who is always too busy all the time. So just take this one thing off your shoulders and actually give it to somebody that can do a really amazing job, a really caring job, and that you're being looked after yourself because your family's being looked after, but then your family members also receiving that amazing care. So oh, thank you so much for talking about this. I think it's been a really great discussion, and I hope it does give people some food for thought, shall
Absolutely.
we say.
And if they're not in a position yet where they want to, work with someone like me to do it, I do have a free guide, actually. Perhaps, do you have show notes, Nikki? Can we put a link?
Yeah, please. Yeah, drop me the link, and I'll make sure that goes in the show notes for everybody so that they can see that.
Yeah, it just guides you through the first few steps of getting sourcing care for yourself. So if you're not ready to work with someone like me, that'll help you along your way if you think you've got a relative that's starting to need a bit of care.
Yeah, amazing. Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you, and good luck with your business.
Thank you very much. Speak to you soon.